Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Jason Freeman. I work here in the Author Events Office, and I'm very excited to be here tonight to introduce Patricia Lockwood. Dubbed the smutty metaphor queen of Lawrence, Kansas by the New York Times, and even though she and her husband now live in Savannah, Georgia, it's just too good a title not to use. Extraordinary, eccentric, and entertaining by The Guardian, and the unofficial poet laureate of Twitter. Patricia Lockwood is the author of 2014's groundbreaking Motherland, Fatherland, Homeland Sexuals, a book of obscene, angry, funny verse that is, quote, unforgettable, literally. Once read, it cannot be forgotten. And that's from NPR. They mean business. Her 2013 satirical poem, Rape Joke, first printed on the website The All, quote, reawakened a generation's interest in poetry. Her debut poetry collection, Balloon Pop Outlaw, Black, was trumpeted as one of 2012's best by The New Yorker. Her new memoir is called Priestdaddy. It tells the story of her deeply unconventional upbringing and irascible Catholic priest father, a lover of firearms, shredding the guitar, and books about submarines. She claims that his two literary antecedents are Toad from Toad Hall and Uncle Matthew from Nancy Mitford's books. In last week's Times review, it was claimed that the writer, quote, must nourish his reader, even in the New York Times, they can't say her, his reader over hundreds of pages, and one can't guzzle high-octane fuel the whole journey. Rare is the writer whose gifts naturally span both of these categories. In her first work of prose, the poet Patricia Lockwood proves herself a formidably gifted writer who can do pretty much anything she pleases. Here to test that theory, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Patricia Lockwood to the Free Library.
Was anyone here the last time I read in Philly? Do we have like one person? Ooh, two, okay. Did I chug an entire Red Bull at the podium? I did, okay, because I was like, what do I remember about the Philly reading? I have a vague recollection of standing at the podium, cracking a Red Bull, and like chugging the entire thing in one go. So I brought another one. Maybe that will happen again here tonight. You guys, I think, are in for a treat because this is the last night of my official tour. I've been on tour now for like 2 months. I'm physically and mentally insane. I entered a sort of like fugue state yesterday and have just been like walking around in a dream ever since. I have no idea what's going on. And ooh, I think that we're gonna read from the seminarian chapter tonight. Does that seem good? Okay. Thank you. Yes, thanks for that. So the deal with the seminarian chapter is that I do a special accent for him because he is from Chicago. So I do like an extremely cartoonish Chicago accent. But as the tour has gone on, it's only gotten weirder and like farther away from the original source material. So we're going to see what happens tonight. I don't know how it's going to sound. Thank you for that introduction, Jason. That was wonderful. Also, I really like that quote that's like, her poetry is literally unforgettable. Once read, it cannot be forgotten. That sounds like the Mummy's curse or something. Like, I'm pretty sure you can forget it at some point, you know, like there are extenuating circumstances where you might not remember my poetry in the future, but no, you've been cursed. Patricia's curse. You can't forget her poetry ever. Oh, man. So has anyone actually read this yet? You can lie. Oh, cool. Okay. So we have some people who are ready for what's about to happen. All right. This is a chapter called Men of the Cloth. And the basic backstory here, in case you don't know, is that my father is a married Catholic priest. My husband and I, due to crazy life circumstances, have had to move back in with them. And there is also this weirdo living there who is going to be ordained a priest in about 6 months from the point that I start reading. And he is my favorite person in the world. The seminarian is a crotchety young Italian man with a disapproving nose, a black, boyish haircut, and eyes the precise shape of watermelon seeds. He was born, like many seminarians, at the age of 65, with a pipe in his mouth and a glass of port in his hand. He's tall, but he hunches slightly under the weight of tradition, and whenever he emerges from the dark rectory into the sunshine, he blinks like an overeducated cave creature who's in the process of evolving away several of his most frivolous body parts, which is a dick joke, by the way. I expect his voice to be ponderous and dignified to fit this overall picture, but when he opens his mouth, he rolls out the broad and hilarious vowels of Chicago. I love him instantly, and beyond all reason, in the way you love people you're going to be able to write about. He is devoted to 3 things, and 3 things only: God, Buicks, and Italy. He believes the ideal woman lives somewhere on the boot, rolling down hillsides in a red check skirt with a bottle of wine in each fist, her boobs like perfectly twirled forkfuls of pasta. He will never meet her, but she is there. This allows him to feel content. It would be very difficult to be celibate in Italy, he tells me, a muscle leaping in his jaw, probably one of the main ones you use when you eat lasagna. Here in America, it's easy. I sit back and I study him. Here is a man who heard a hot woman called a tomato once in his boyhood and took it so literally that the course of the rest of his life was set. He knows he was meant to be a priest because once he had a girlfriend who wore an intoxicating perfume, and then one day his mother bought it and started spritzing herself with it too. That is a sign, if anything is. If my dad, at some point during the 90s, had come home on a skateboard, smoothing his butt cut and adjusting his wallet chain, I would have gone straight into the nunnery without a moment's hesitation. Such things belong to the realm of destiny. Somehow, the seminarian and I are perfectly comfortable with each other, in the way people who agree about absolutely nothing sometimes are. However, as the weeks pass, it becomes clear that I'm a bad influence. In the course of a conversation about guitars, I accidentally introduce him to the word wanking. What's wanking? He asks. Do you mean like masturbating? Masturbating upon the guitar? On cue, my father begins to play the riff. Now, the riff I describe elsewhere in the book. My father plays one thing and one thing only on his electric guitar. I describe it as sounding like a Republican terrier howling the first 3 notes of Blood on the Water to a smoke-red moon. Like, bow, bow, bow. It's like that. It's extremely beautiful. What would you call that music? The seminarian asks after a moment of speechless listening. He studied classical piano himself for a long time and knows there is something amiss here. Is there a name for it? I weigh and reject the term priestcore. Technically speaking, I think it's just ass rock, I say. Ass rock, he cries. It's clear he's never heard the phrase before. That's very funny. Ass rock. I begin to suspect I'm being fattened for eventual sacrifice on the top of a mountain. My mother is cramming me with 5 or 6 meals a day and slides cookies underneath my door when I don't answer her knocks. Not to be outdone, the seminarian tiptoes up to me one evening when I'm napping on the downstairs couch and wakes me by dangling a slice of ham over my lips. No! I shout, because that's what they teach you in kindergarten. Don't let anyone touch you with their ham unless you say yes. But it's such good ham, he pleads. And you're really too skinny. Why? How much do you think I should weigh? 190 pounds, he answers instantaneously. Evidently, this has been much on his mind. I prop myself up on one elbow and stare at him. Have you ever considered that you might be a feeder? What's a feeder? If sex education has failed him, it's my job to fill in the gaps. It's a sort of a food daddy who feeds a woman until she becomes plump enough for his erotic delectation. He gives her cookies and ice cream and second lunches and midnight snacks, and eventually all her clothes rip off and both of them get excited. His eyes widen. Voluptuous vistas are opening before him. You can make her as big as you want. I picture a woman shooting up into the sky, bursting out of her dress and raising her leg to crush St. Peter's Basilica. As big as God will let her be, I promise. He gives me a look of intrigue, second only to the look of intrigue once given to me by a surrealist poet when I told him that some men desire above all else to watch truckers have sex with their wives. See, I need to know these things, he says, with the brisk attitude of a man filing information away for future use. I just found out what a furry was. My friend told me, and I was very surprised. A wave of pleasure washes over me as I imagine this encounter. Two young men, tall with theological purpose, discussing people who dress up as stuffed animals and scritch each other's bellies at conventions. Why on earth do you need to know about furries? Because people will confess to me about them. Someone will confess to me I am a furry, and I need to know what that is. It almost makes me want to turn Catholic again, just so I could go to confession sometime and lay a big, eloquent paw right up against the screen just as he asked me what my sins were. Somehow or other, the seminarian has heard about MILFs, and he is haunted by the concept. He fears that hordes of MILFs are roaming the plains of dating, simultaneously breastfeeding and trying to trick young men into having sex with them. Are MILFs something that's popular in secular culture for guys in their 20s to go after? He asks. Yes, I say gravely, signaling Jason across the room to write that quote down word for word. Very, very popular. The most popular thing now. His eyes widen and he crosses his legs, as if to protect his holy jewels from the very notion of a MILF. I consider other possible lies to tell him. In Britain, they call them nummy mummies. And due to the gender imbalance left over from the Great War, there are 2 of them for every male. There's no way of telling whether your own mother is a MILF, but if she likes to play bingo, it is almost certain. The wine of Italy is stomped out by MILFs, so when you taste the wine, you are tasting their desire. During the full moon, a MILF lactates a powerful sex milk that is instantly addictive to any man who tries it. He interrupts my reverie to explore the subject further. What's the difference between a MILF and a cougar? Cougars are hornier, I say, thinking fast. A MILF doesn't have to be horny at all. It just has to be a mom you'd like to F. But a cougar is horny, and it prowls. So disordered, the seminarian breathes. Calling people disordered is practically his favorite thing to do, and a tawny animal woman who chases after tender cubs is about as disordered as it gets. I hope I never meet one. I get very close to his face and fix him with my most feline expression. Too late, buddy. You already have. I want to take the gay ink blot test so bad that I can taste it. According to my father, they administer an ink blot test to all the men who are studying to become priests in order to determine whether they're possessed by the handsome little demon of same-sex attraction. My father refers to it as SSA, both for jauntiness and to save time. I'm not sure whether the ink blots themselves have been somehow designed to be gay. Balls everywhere, kaleidoscopic bursts of abs, the words, "I'm gay," doing backflips in the ink, a dong on the classic Rorschach butterfly, or whether they just expect people to see gay things in them. Either way, the test cannot be categorized as either scientific or sane, but my father places great faith in it. It's foolproof, he tells me, with the self-satisfaction of a man who knows he would pass. If he took the test, he would see only Batmobiles, but these guys would see the naked body of Robin. His beliefs about homosexuality are in general keeping with those of the church, with a few small but distinctive flourishes of his own. Earlier this week, for instance, he informed me that Elton John became gay because he was raised by too many ants. Seems plausible, doesn't it? When the seminarian took the inkblot test, he saw bunnies. You saw bunnies? I ask. Bunnies are fine, he says with authority. Bunnies are very wholesome. What you don't want to see is half animal, half humans. That would show you were messed up. Regular bunnies, I guess, are just evidence you love Easter, but woe to the one who looks into the ink and sees a rabbit with the luscious lower half of a man. Important. Do you understand how badly I would fail this test? I would get something worse than an F. But my father refuses to even let me look at the gay ink blots. He's afraid of what he might find. He knows he was saved from ever seeing me bring home a girl named Boots with screws in her ears for one reason and one reason only, because I got married when I was 21 to a man I met in cyberspace. We don't know if it works on women, they say cautiously, when I raise the subject amid the happy family clamor of the dinner table. That's not, we haven't studied that yet. In fact, the seminarian sighs, no one knows how lesbians work. It's easy, I say. You put one leg over her leg, and then she puts her other leg over your other leg, and then you brush each other's hair forever while not going to church. He rolls his eyes. You're not a lesbian, Tricia, he tells me patiently. You wear dresses. The seminarian talks frequently about his celibate powers, which mainly consist of being able to get up extremely early. No, it doesn't sound good to me either, though it's plausible that my extreme deficiency of celibacy is the reason I often sleep till noon. To protect and strengthen these celibate powers, he has developed a move called the celibacy block, where he holds up both arms in front of himself in the shape of a cross to ward off the person who's trying to seduce him. Mainly women, as he explains to me, who are wearing volleyball shorts when there isn't even any volleyball going on. You know what would be a better idea, I tell him? To just point a gun at any girl who's cute and yell, "I don't think so!" at the top of your lungs. The celibacy block is necessary, it seems, because the woods are full of women who lust after men of the cloth. We call them chalice chippers. This seminarian explains one Sunday, piling his plate with the cold cuts and pickles my mother always sets out after the last Mass. They're everywhere, my father adds, vengefully forking a slice of roast beef, and goes on to tell us the story of a woman who once gave him a teddy bear soaked with your mother's perfume to try and tempt me. How would that even work? Has any man who ever drew breath been seduced according to this method? Also, I would love to date a woman who soaks teddy bears in perfume and sexually gives them to priests, because she's got to be crazier in bed than any atheist ever dreamed of being. Maybe once you got back to her apartment, you would see an even bigger teddy propped up against her pillow, soaked in holy water and waiting for you, with a Bible between its legs opened up to the Song of Songs. Maybe it's for the best, after all, that the seminarian knows what a furry is. If they ever come for him, he'll be ready. I am not sure what the seminarian wants exactly. He acts with admirable propriety at all times, despite the fact that all the chairs in this house are upholstered with velvet and leave perfect impressions of your hindquarters whenever you sit down on them. My mother obliterates the prints with the palm of her hand whenever she encounters them, but I sneak back in and sit on the chairs again when she's not looking. The seminarian is unaffected by this campaign, however. His sights are set on something higher. The firmest desire I ever hear him assert is that he would like to have a lady wash his clothes, perhaps in a river. Why a river, specifically? I probed further, carrying 2 mugs of tea in from the kitchen to fortify us against the doldrums of 2 o'clock. I want to watch you rub my clothes on the stones, he responds. I look down at him for a long moment, wondering if I should tip the hot tea out into his lap so he doesn't get too turned on by my gesture of servitude. And he shrugs. I like domestic stuff, he says, his voice falling to a sudden romance novel huskiness. So fuck a butler. Men, it bears repeating, are so weird. This is so far outside my area of sexual expertise that it's not even funny. Tell me you want to role-play a butler fuck while pretending to serve your penis on a big silver tray, and I will nod with understanding and perhaps even offer to film it. But you want a woman to wash your clothes in a river? What are you, some kind of pervert? Thank you. Actually, I think that was pretty accurate. I think that's what people sound like in Chicago. I read it in Chicago that way, and no one got that upset, so I figure that I did just fine. I'm going to drink this now. Wait, should I do it all at once again? All right. Chug, chug, chug. Please, yeah. Keep it going. Keep it going. It's running down my face. I did pretty well, though. Thank you. I will conduct the rest of this Q&A with Red Bull running down my chin. I hope that improves your experience. Yes.
So I'm curious, for your last 2 months, was this question ever asked? How do your parents and the seminarian feel about your memoir?
Yes, everyone actually has asked that. Every single person who has attended my readings has asked that. Now, it's interesting because my mom and dad have not read it. I don't know that they ever will. My father, I have explained, will not read it because it has no submarines in it, and he only reads books that have submarines in them, and that's sort of like Cold War submarine tension. My book does not contain that, so he will not be reading it. My mom is more mysterious. I keep trying to get her to listen to the audiobook, but she's like, eh. I'm like, Mom, it's getting these really good reviews. You should give it a shot. And she's like, I'll have to read it sometime. And I'm like, okay. It's just completely bizarre. The seminary we do not know about. We have not heard from him in a while. Not because of the book, but it's a mystery. However, when I was writing it, I took the time to read scenes out loud to him and make sure that he laughed at them. And that's how I knew. That, for me, was the seminarian stamp of approval. Because, you know, you don't want to put anything in there that someone would be super uncomfortable with. I think that I was pretty respectful of him. I think it's a fairly affectionate portrait. But, so they haven't read it yet, but I think it's been cool for my dad because a lot of people have gotten back in touch with him when they've seen the coverage and like old students and stuff like that, like people he hasn't talked to in a long time. And I think he likes that. I think that that has been really nice for him. So that's cool.
Yes. Okay. I have. I'm curious. The chapter voice in here, sort of a different format than the chapters that preceded it.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, that signified something, or was to signify something to you. Was there more stream of consciousness after that? And I noticed that and then read things differently afterwards, so I'm wondering what that was about.
So part of what was true about me is that I did not want to, I went into it knowing that I was not going to write a super traditional memoir. The memoirs that I like have always played with form a little bit. You know, you go back to something like Maxine Hong Kingston's like The Woman Warrior. It's in 3 sections. You know, it's fictionalized. You're in her mind in a way that feels very unusual. I always knew that it was never going to be a thing that was like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. It was very important for me writing this book because I am a poet to keep chapters of it that felt like poetry to me, that felt like writing poetry. So I love writing the humor, and I love, delving deeper into things like an abortion Barbie and Missouri Gothic, but I wanted almost just to set aside a space where I felt that I could play, do the sort of play that you do in poetry that is a lot more difficult to come across in prose. So if you're not super familiar with the lyric essay format, it does read a lot differently. Like, the spaces really mean something. Sort of like the silence between the paragraphs makes connections. You don't have to spell everything out for people. And I'm a person maybe who doesn't always like to spell things out. I like to be a little bit more impressionistic with it. And so that really felt right for that chapter. It was never like, I'll befuddle the reader here, I'll bamboozle her and confuse her. No, it was just something, for me, formally, I like to break out of boxes and I really like play.
So your beliefs are they are at odds with the upbringing. Do you feel that having to move back home and then writing this book, was that able to sort of pour more light onto the relationship that you have with your mom because she's such an important character, like person in the memoir?
Yes, that was definitely true. A couple people have noted, they're like, really the hero of this book is your mom. It's called Priestdaddy, but it's about your mom. And that's because my mother was the person who was like present for us in our lives. She was the person who was always there. My dad was kind of just like a vanishing figure in either robes or underwear. But my mom was there. She did everything for us. She was always present. And I think returning back to the household, I really felt that dynamic strongly again. There were ways in which that was sort of suffocating. Excuse me. You become a child again, in a way. But there was a way that it really brought back to me how much she was the person who had really raised us. And also her quotes are just like the absolute best. So, when you hang out with your mom, it can be a little bit rough, You don't necessarily want to spend 24/7 with her because it's, there's like a mother-daughter thing going on that can make things a little tense at times. But if I feel like I'm there to like do field reporting on just what this woman is saying constantly, I'm like, hell yeah, I'll spend all this time with my mom. I'll like drink with her every night. She's saying like gold. I'm like writing it down as we go. She's saying absolute comic gold. So that made it a little bit easier to be writing as I did it. But yeah, so you return to that house and you're like, I remember. This is how it was. Like all of my memories, my mom is somewhere there. It's like a tall, comforting presence, and my dad feels more like an absence.
I'm just curious about your use of Twitter, because I follow you on Twitter. Do you
Did
remember?
you see my ranch beans tweet?
I don't know if I saw that.
Okay,
actually.
so check it out. I invented a new meal at Cracker Barrel. It's called ranch beans, but you spell it R@NCH capital BEANZ. And I went in there today and I told you that I was like in a fugue state. So I went into the Cracker Barrel and I was like, I don't even remember this. I was like, give me your largest possible meal of beans and I will eat it. And they bring me like this crock of beans and I had a thing of ranch and I was like, ranch beans. Continue. I just thought that was a good tweet.
I'm just wondering if you remember what drew you to Twitter in the first place, and was there like either a tweet that you saw or a reaction you got to one of your tweets, and what you get out of it, basically?
Interesting. Okay, so the reason I got on Twitter at all is because my husband got me my first ever sort of smartphone, one of those ones that slides out and you type into with the little buttons. He got it for me for his birthday because he's very nice. So it dates to May 16th, 2011, and he was putting different apps and things on it, and he was like, do you want me to put Twitter on here? And I was like, yeah, whatever. And I knew one guy who was on it, my friend Greg. And so I sort of got on there, I followed him, and since no one was paying attention to me and no one was really following me, I was like, I can say whatever I want. And for me, it's always... It's very fertile creatively for me to feel like there's a space where just like no one is listening and I have complete freedom to say whatever I want. So I just started tweeting out into the void, and since they were sort of like comic tweets, they got attention fairly quickly. Now, that's not necessarily true anymore that I feel like I can say whatever I want. The climate on Twitter, I would say, is a little bit different now. And there's more of a sense that, like, when you have 66,000 followers, you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't tweet that thing about ranch beans because someone might get really offended, So it's a little bit more constrained. So now it's more I tweet because, you know, my friends are there, because the platform is there. But when I initially got into it, it was just kind of happenstance, you know? He's like, do you want it on your phone? I'm like, sure, whatever. Now I'm going to live tweet. I think I started off like live tweeting a rewatch of the movie Bambi. But I did it like erotically. I think that was one of the first things I did. And again, like if no one's paying attention, you can do that kind of thing and not feel weird about it. So, are you on Twitter? Okay. Check out that Ranch Beans tweet.
Planning on doing any like Saturday Night Live skits?
I should
Can
probably
you write for them?
Get on that. Yeah, I should probably be a comedian.
I think you could do it.
There is always a side of me that was like, man, what if? You know, that if I had not become a writer, I have like a dream of a parallel life where I was a sketch comedian and where I was working with other people. And probably part of that fantasy has to do with the fact that I work alone in very, very solitary circumstances. So to me, it's sort of wonderful and fantastical to imagine the climate of a writer's room. I know that in reality they're absolutely heinous and atrocious, and they're constantly like making jokes about like Courtney Cox's womb or whatever. But I'm like, what if I had had that life where I had found a writing partner, if I had found like some sort of like writing room, some sketch troupe I could have been a part of. So yeah, that is always something that particularly had been in my mind. But I guess in the end, I just like to write more. Yeah, but thank you. That was a wonderful compliment.
I think speaking of the what ifs, I was just wondering what your thoughts are about the fact that you weren't able to go to college and how that affected your writing, and like if you feel academia would have shaped your identity as a writer.
Yeah, my feelings about that have changed. I used to like get really sad watching shows like Gilmore Girls because they would have all these establishing shots of like a college in autumn. And I'm like, oh, I never got to go to college in autumn. Like it's very, very sad to me that I didn't have that. But now at a distance of however the fuck many years, I'm like, maybe it's good that some of us do not have that background. And I'm not making any claim that, you know, college or that writing programs specifically, you know, extrude writers into a sort of like sausage shapes that they all come out the same. I don't think that that's true. But I do think it's good maybe to have someone who is outside the language and outside the jargon and the terminology. Because I know people, I know smart people, like people who have really, really great thoughts about literature and poetry, but it comes out a little bit in the language of academia. And there's something in me that instinctively bristles against that. I don't quite like it. I feel like it's sort of exclusionary to people. And also, I feel that it's like lazy. I feel that it should be broken apart. It makes me much more upset than I realized, but also that Red Bull that I chugged is maybe kicking in right now as I share my thoughts on this matter. So yeah, so I do have the perception when I go read at, you know, universities and things like that, that I'm a little bit outside, that I'm like more of like a novelty to them, like a little bit of a mascot maybe is how I've phrased it before. But I don't know, maybe that's good. Maybe someone should do that. Maybe we should allow people to have their own sort of quirky, self-directed educations. Maybe we should, you know? And maybe I'll teach at some point and be very, very good at it because I bring a fresh perspective, and also I have a huge Red Bull before every single class. So sign up for that if you're interested.
I believe it's possible that one of the first times I heard about your work was on a list of Twitter accounts in about 2012 of weird Twitter with like you and Drill and like Rare Basement and the
Rare
current
Basement, I miss her.
Yeah. Oh. And the current president of the United States.
Yeah.
So do you have anything to say from a historical perspective about that era leading to this one?
We're responsible. We did it. Donald Trump was a part of Weird Twitter. He was one of the original Weird Twitter accounts. There's something to it now where it's like, why should I even bother to tweet something absurd? You know, like the president's here. Like it's already happening. What's the use of doing it? But I guess, I mean, so I went to a Donald Trump rally and I wrote about my experience there. And sort of as I was watching him, I'm like, all right, I mean, this is pretty much the suicidal endpoint of the American experiment. Like, you know, maybe it's like a 4 horsemen of the apocalypse sort of thing, and Twitter had to happen before Donald Trump could come to power, and then the world's gonna end shortly thereafter. I don't know. But I do like, there's a sort of like divinatory quality to his tweets, where now anything that happens that he has done, you can go back and find a tweet from the past where he like complains about someone else doing that thing. So maybe, you know, we talk about time travelers going back and forth. Maybe he's the time traveler. Who knows, man? Maybe he saw it all coming from the beginning. In short, it's fucking depressing to be on Twitter right now. Is this the general perception? Yeah, I mean, it is depressing, man. It used to be so fun, and now it is a kind of hell. God bless.
So first, I really loved the article that you wrote about Is Poetry Work?
Yes!
And like Nicolas Cage being the greatest living poet who ever
is
lived. And
the greatest
having like
living
never
poet.
written a poem at all.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you if you were writing poetry while you were writing this book, and if writing memoir affected your voice in poetry, and how, and also what poets are you reading?
So I was not able to write poetry while I was writing the memoir, which was very weird for me. I wrote it over a period of like a couple years, like 3 years. And I think that maybe the last poem that I wrote before I went all in on the memoir was maybe government spending or something like What is the Zoo for What? It just turned out that I could not do both things at the same time. It's like a pat your head and rub your stomach sort of thing. The processes for me are extremely, extremely different. And I wanted the memoir to be good, you know? And I was like, maybe if my energies are also being diverted elsewhere, maybe I'll put some line into a poem that should have gone into the memoir. Maybe I should just like give this my whole wad, if you can think of it in those terms, of having a wad that you need to put somewhere. So, all right, let's investigate this like wad situation. So it's like you shoot your wad, or you like put a wad into something. Does a wad have like a special place it needs to go? This is a question for the men in the crowd. What's going on with like the metaphor of a wad? Yeah, I mean, is the wad our idea? Is it our energy? Is it our essence? See me after the show to give me your ideas about this. So yeah, I was not able to do both. And that was very sad and tragic for me. But that is also why I wanted to do things like chapters like Voice, where I felt that I just had that little bit more amount of freedom where I could play. And I also have not read a lot of poetry recently, so instead of telling you what I'm reading, you should probably tell me what you're reading, because I've like missed out on the last 3 years. Anybody good? Come up. Major Jackson is good. Yes. Everyone read Major Jackson, local Philly hero, Major. No, nothing for him. Yeah, he just did that Renga for Obama, right? He actually asked me to participate in it, and I was like, I can't write poetry yet again, man. I'm so sorry. I have to like get back my skills, so I'm flexing my way into it again.
So my question sort of relates to the person who was asking about Weird Twitter. And I know that you came out of that kind of era and scene. I want to know how your poetry existed in the context of the other poets who were using Twitter as a medium, like the alt-lit people. The
alt-lit people, yeah.
Yeah, and that whole like garbage mess of a scene that turned into. And how do you think your poetry existed in the context of what other people using the platform were doing?
It's interesting because I feel like poets, and even alt-lit poets who like should have been better at it, were not that great at using Twitter. And I wasn't totally sure why. There was almost something that happened where there was a scene with Weird Twitter where there were people who were not writing poetry before, and then like sort of during and after Weird Twitter they began to, which was more interesting to me. But as the actual sort of like HTML giant spawned type alt-lit scene, I never really felt like the tweets were that interesting. And of more mainstream poets, it was literally like a picture of an egg that they tweeted. And I'm like, thank you for this picture of an egg. There's something very pure about that, though, isn't there? They're like, I'm Mary Oliver. Here's a picture of my egg that I had for breakfast. It's like, maybe that's what we should get from Mary Oliver. Like, maybe we should get pictures of her eggs. I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah, so I didn't really feel like I knew a lot of the alt-lit people, and a lot of them I liked, and I liked their work and things like that, but it never felt integrated with Twitter to me in a way that like the sort of like comedy, or I'm calling it weird Twitter, but I don't actually think of it that way, because anyone who's actually like part of what happened there does not think of it in those terms. Yeah. Yeah, but it did turn into a shit show, didn't it? It's like, everyone's a rapist. Great. It's like, all right. But I mean, sort of, lit scenes, they sort of like come to a ripeness and then destroy themselves. That's pretty much how it works. So it was destined to happen with alt-lit as well.
One question I had reading this, I found this so incredibly hysterical and hilarious, and had to read some passages over and over, and I thought that I must have found this funnier than the average, because I also grew up so Catholic. And then there were parts of this book that I felt, probably angrier than the average, because I grew up so Catholic. And I felt some of your frustration in certain, parts, but very softly. And I wondered how you kind of reconcile the way you grew up, your beliefs, your dad. It seems like there weren't a lot of really angry exchanges between you and your dad, and like how?
Yeah, it's great, because my agent at one point was like, "We need to have a climactic scene where you scream at your father," and I was like, never happened. That will just never happen in this lifetime. He is a person who just inhabits his own reality. After a while, you figure out that screaming at something like that, you're like screaming at the wind, you're screaming at a thunderstorm, you're screaming at an element. He never would incorporate anyone else's ideas. Or he would, and then later, he would act like it was his idea all along, that sort of thing. Like my mom would sort of tell him to do something. He's like, "Don't be an idiot." And then later he'd be like, "I've had a great idea." So it was that kind of thing. I think for me, the only way I could do this, the only way I could approach these subjects with him is in like a sideways fashion, by writing my own account of it. And like I said, people are getting in touch with him now. They're talking to him again. He took my brother aside on like a vacation and was like, "It seems like I was not, maybe the greatest dad. Like maybe I was an absent father." Like it had never occurred to him before, which is mind-boggling, I think, to women, maybe more than to men. But he was like, it just had never occurred to me. He was like, I don't think that I was like very there for you, when you were kids. I had other stuff going on. And he was like, "But I love to see, what a great dad you are to your son." And so that, with my dad, maybe you can only sneak that stuff in. Like those weird, like Jessica Seinfeld, like putting stuff into her kids' brownies. Do you think she's still doing that? She's like sneaking vegetables into them for a long time. Yeah. I mean, there was one time I got right up in my dad's face and I like yelled directly into his mouth. And it was because of something he had said to my sister. So I've never, ever done it on my own behalf. I don't think I've ever shown my actual anger on my own behalf to my dad. I don't know that I ever will.
Maybe like a half-second answer, but have you ever heard what Jonathan Franzen thinks of you?
Oh my God. I want to know so bad. We were just talking about this backstage, because we were like, oh my gosh. Apparently he read here one time and his book got spoiled by the Q&A and he got really mad, which seems like something he would do. But I do want to know. I want to know if at this point maybe he knows that there's like a chick out there who once wrote a thing about him like grilling a portobello mushroom that is like a touchstone for a lot of people. Whenever he says something in an interview, it gets retweeted like 100 more times. I don't think he knows about me though. And at this point, to be honest, I mean, our fabled enmity, I've turned on it now, and mostly I just want to like have a sleepover with him. I don't know. I was like, Jonathan, you suck so bad. And then I was like, but what if we just had a sleepover, though, and we just talked all night? So it's not like I have any bad feelings at all about Jonathan Franzen. Apparently I want to hang out with him in a 12-year-old girl kind of way. Also, I have drawn some Jonathan Franzens on people's books. They are not accurate. They do not look like him. So if any of you ask me for that, just be prepared. It's not going to be, the Jonathan Franzen that you're used to looking at. It's my version. All right. Well, I will be signing books in the upstairs, and I do draw on them. I draw animals for you. So if you decide what animal you want ahead of time, and then tell me when you come up, I will do my level best to give you the greatest artistic interpretation of that animal the world has ever seen. Thank you, Philadelphia.